Some men carry war in their bones, even when the world thinks they've laid their weapons down. Let us know in the comment section below, what would you do if your past was the only thing keeping your present safe? Reed Marlowe always enjoyed watching things break. Fences, bottles, people. He didn't smile when it happened. He just leaned back, arms crossed, as if daring the world to test his limits. His boots carried the dried dust of county roads, and a patch on his back, painted black and stitched red, was a warning more than a symbol. Devil's Chain MC. Small towns like Carter Hollow didn't see many of them anymore, but Reed, he liked to remind people, they still existed. He leaned against his matte black Harley in the gravel shoulder of a two-lane county road, lighting a cigarette with one hand and motioning to his two buddies, Trent and Mace, to slow their bikes. They did, both pulling up beside him like vultures circling low. "Did the place?" Trent asked, his eyes narrowed behind dark wraparound glasses. He nodded toward the farmhouse ahead. Wide porch, flaking white paint, and a big red barn out back. Idyllic. Vulnerable. "Yep," Reed answered, exhaling smoke through his nostrils. "Heard the husband's some kind of recluse. Wife runs the whole spread. Easy pickings." Mace chuckled, slapping the chrome handlebar. "City boys pay good for organic pork. Figure we scare her a little. Lean on her for supply. She's got the land, we got the muscle." Reed's jaw flexed as he flicked the cigarette into the ditch. He didn't need much of a reason. Intimidation was oxygen to him. And small-time farmers didn't call the sheriff until after things got ugly, especially in towns like this where trust in uniforms had worn thin. "Let's go say howdy." They revved their bikes and rolled toward the farmhouse, the engines howling like war drums across the cornfield-lined gravel road. Chickens scattered as they neared the gate. A dog barked once, then bolted under the porch. Emily Dalton heard them before she saw them. She wiped her hands on her jeans and stepped out of the coupe, brow furrowing as the three bikes cut their engines near the front of the house. Her braid was dusted with hay, and her flannel shirt clung damp to her shoulders. She didn't flinch when Reed stepped forward, his eyes scanning her the way a butcher sizes up a carcass. "Afternoon," he said with a crooked smile. "You the lady of the house?" Emily didn't return the smile. "That's right. You're on private property." Reed glanced back at his crew as if amused. "Name's Reed. These are my boys, Trent and Mace. We're businessmen. Looking for a little partnership." Emily tilted her head. "We already have distribution. Don't need partners." Trent leaned against his bike, spitting into the gravel. "You sure? Prizes are about to get real persuasive." She folded her arms. "Is that a threat?" Reed stepped closer, not touching distance but close enough that the air grew heavier. "Ma'am, we're just talking. You run a good-looking farm. Be a shame if supply trucks stopped coming, or if your fences kept getting cut in the night." Emily's eyes didn't blink. Her voice dropped to a cool, firm tone. "You might want to get back on those bikes before my husband gets out here." Reed smirked, glancing over her shoulder. "That him in the barn? Heard he don't come out much. Retired, right? Military or something? Figured he'd be too tired to care." Emily said nothing, but her fingers twitched slightly at her sides. She'd married Jack Dalton after his second deployment. He was soft-spoken, gentle with animals, rarely left the barn unless he needed to. But what Reed didn't know was that Jack didn't talk much because he'd spent too many years listening to men scream. The door to the barn creaked. Reed looked past her. "Oh, speak of the devil." Out of the shadows stepped a man not young, not old, but with a presence that shifted the air like a dropped weight. Jack Dalton wiped his hands on a rag. His denim shirt was stained with grease, forearms roped with muscle, sleeves rolled up, a wide leather belt with a worn buckle. He walked like someone who never expected to be the loudest man in the room, because he... Reed turned to face him, puffing his chest. "You the husband?" Jack nodded once. "You hear the conversation?" Jack took his time answering. "I heard enough." Emily stepped slightly behind him, not out of fear but instinct, like a seasoned dance they'd done before. Her hand brushed his lower back for a second. He gave the faintest nod. Reed stepped forward, cocky. "We're just introducing ourselves, discussing opportunities." Jack stared at him for a beat too long. "You always do business by threatening women?" Trent snorted. "We're just having fun, Grandpa. Don't get your barn boots twisted." Jack looked past Reed at the two bikes, then back at the man in front of him. "You want to threaten someone? Pick me. I've got more time than you do." Reed's smile faltered. "You trying to play tough?" Jack stepped closer now. Not fast. Deliberate. "I'm not playing anything." There was something about Jack Dalton's voice, low like distant thunder, that cooled the air around them. Reed's bravado started to unravel, though he fought to hold it. Trent shifted his weight uncomfortably. "Come on, Reed. Let's go. Ain't worth it." But Reed wasn't done. "You got a mouth for a man who hides in a barn." Jack didn't blink. "You got a death wish for someone who doesn't know when to leave." Silence hung there for a moment, electric, taut. A hawk cried in the distance. The dog under the porch whined softly, and Jack did something that changed everything. He took off his gloves, one by one, tucked them into his back pocket, and walked past Reed without another word, heading straight for the fence post beside the house, where a steel rod was embedded deep in the soil. He gripped the handle, pulled it free, revealing the 12-inch pry bar he used for fixing tractor blades. He didn't raise it. He didn't threaten. He just held it in one hand and turned around, casual. And that, more than anything, made Reed step back. Emily spoke for the first time in minutes. Her voice was soft, sure. "That's your second warning." Reed opened his mouth, but nothing came. Instead, he turned on his heel. "Mount up," he snapped. Engines roared again. The bikers peeled off the gravel, tires spitting dust behind them. Reed didn't look back, but Jack watched them until they were nothing but fading echoes down the county road. Only then did he slide the pry bar back into the fence post. Emily let out the breath she'd been holding. "You okay?" she asked. Jack nodded. "You?" "Always," she replied. But both of them knew this wasn't over. Not yet. Jack Dalton sat on the edge of his workbench, hands stained with oil, the smell of diesel and hay thick in the barn air. His fingers moved absently, reassembling a rusted carburetor he'd already taken apart twice this week, not because it needed fixing, but because the repetition steadied his thoughts. Some men meditated. Jack rebuilt engines. He hadn't said a word since the bikers left, and Emily didn't push him. She knew better. Instead, she moved through the barn in quiet steps, placing a fresh jug of water by the tack wall, checking the feed sacks. Her presence was enough. He could feel her, like gravity. Always there, always steady. It had been that way since they met, two people who didn't talk much unless it mattered. When the wrench slipped and scraped across his knuckles, he hissed quietly. Emily was at his side before he could blink, a small first aid tin in her hand. She didn't ask if he was okay. She didn't need to. She opened the tin, took his hand, and wiped the blood away. "I saw the look in your eyes," she said softly, not looking up. Jack flexed his fingers as she cleaned the cut. "Which look?" "The one I saw before Fallujah," she murmured. "You remember? When you came back for leave, and I asked if the worst was over." "You didn't answer. You just had that look." He was silent. Emily wrapped his hand, taping it clean. "They'll come back." "I know," he said. His voice didn't carry anger. It carried something older, like stone. "And next time—" "They won't ask nicely." They weren't asking nicely this time, she said. They just hadn't decided yet whether they could get away with it. Jack stood and walked to the open barn doors. The sun was dipping lower now, and long shadows spilled across the golden wheat field behind the house. He watched the road, always the road. His hand rested on the wood frame, thumb tapping slowly, rhythmically. "They're testing for weakness," he said. "It's how guys like that operate. Push a little, see if anyone flinches. If they don't hit resistance, they escalate." Emily leaned against the workbench, arms crossed. "They didn't find weakness today." Jack exhaled through his nose. "They didn't find fear. But I'm not sure that's the same thing. They stayed like that for a few minutes. Two people built from quiet steel." Then Jack turned and walked back to the bench, wiped his hands again, and looked Emily in the eye. "I need to make some calls." Emily's brow lifted. "You're not planning to handle this alone, are you?" "No," he said, "but I know what's coming. I've seen it before." He picked up his old Nokia flip phone from the corner of the bench. Emily watched him scroll through numbers he hadn't used in years. Most of them weren't saved under names, just initials, locations, deployment dates. Jack didn't believe in labeling memories. "Who's first?" she asked. "Denver," he replied. "Then Richmond. Then Carson City." Emily gave a tight nod. "You're sure they're still reachable?" "They'll answer," he said. "They always do." And they did. By nightfall, Jack had spoken to 3 men he hadn't heard from in nearly a decade. They weren't surprised by his voice. One of them, a guy named Shepard, who once took shrapnel saving Jack's life, said simply, "Thought it might be time." No questions, no hesitation, just when and where. "They'll be here in 2 days," Jack told Emily over dinner. His plate sat half full, untouched. "Shep, Cal, and Remy said they're bringing their gear." Emily sipped her coffee. "Are we starting a war, Jack?" He shook his head, just showing the flag. They ate in silence after that. The old grandfather clock ticked in the background. Outside, a barn owl hooted from the rafters. Normal sounds in a life they had worked hard to build. But peace is only peace when everyone agrees to honor it. The next morning, Emily headed to town early to deliver eggs and bread to the co-op. She kissed Jack's cheek at the doorway, whispering, "Be careful," as if he were the one driving into town full of strangers. Jack just smiled and kissed her hand in return. While she was gone, he worked. He installed a new camera over the barn door, silent, infrared, linked to an old laptop inside the tack room. He checked the locks on every window, reset the motion lights behind the porch. The shotgun under the floorboards hadn't been touched in years. He oiled it carefully, replaced the shells. When he opened the old trunk in the loft, a wave of memories hit him like gunpowder smoke. Uniforms folded tight, medals in velvet boxes, a knife in its sheath, the leather still smooth from daily wear, and a bundle of photographs. A sand-swept base, a smiling squad, a blood-streaked helmet. He didn't linger, just picked out what he needed and resealed the pack. Later that afternoon, as he fixed a broken plank on the fence line, a pickup truck slowed down in front of the property. Jack straightened. The truck didn't stop, just crawled forward, engine idling low. Inside, he saw a familiar face. Mitch Carver, local barfly, occasional snitch, too friendly with the wrong kind of people. Jack met his eyes and tipped his head slightly. Carver nodded and drove off. Message received. Emily returned just before dusk, a streak of worry on her face. "The co-op manager said the boys from Devil's Chain were asking questions in town." Jack's jaw tightened. "What kind of questions?" "About you, about me. If we lived alone. How often we came to town." Jack set the hammer down beside the fence and looked toward the barn. Then toward the long dirt road that cut through the corn like a scar. 2 days, he said. Emily placed a hand on his arm. "And if they don't wait that long?" Jack looked down at her. "Then I won't either." That night they didn't sleep much. Jack sat on the porch until midnight, rifle across his lap, listening for engines. Emily dozed in the rocker beside him, a blanket wrapped tight around her shoulders. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. When the breeze stirred, it carried the faintest scent of gasoline and something else. The engine noise came low and slow over the hills, muffled just enough by the wheat fields to make a man doubt he'd heard it right, until it came again, louder, more deliberate. Jack Dalton rose from his crouch by the chicken coop, one hand steady on the fence post he'd been repairing, the other already shifting toward his hip. The sun hadn't been up more than an hour, but the tension that settled across the Dalton farm didn't care about the time of day. He scanned the road without blinking, tracking the curve past the tree line. Not many folks came up their lane unless they meant to, especially not men on Harleys. This time, there were 5 of them. They didn't barrel in like the day before, no dust trails or showboating rebs. They rolled slow, controlled, predators stalking a second attempt. And this time, they weren't smiling. Melly stepped out of the house the second the bikes touched gravel. She'd been watching through the kitchen window, apron still tied around her waist, flour dusted across her forearm. She didn't call to Jack, didn't ask if she should run inside. She just stood still, observed, like she had back when she was reading wind shifts in Kansas storms. When something was coming, you didn't yell, you read the air and braced. Jack met her eyes for a second, just enough to say, "I've got this." Then he turned his body full to the road, standing tall, hands loose but ready. Reed Marlowe was the first off his bike. His boots crunched the gravel with each slow step as he approached the fence. Behind him, Trent and Mace dismounted, but stayed back this time. 2 new faces flanked them, bigger, rougher. One had a chain coiled like a belt. The other didn't bother taking off his helmet. His jacket bore the patch, Devil's Chain, MC, Kansas Chapter. "Morning," Reed said flatly. Jack didn't answer right away. Let the silence stretch, see who blinked. "You came back," he finally said, tone even. Reed smirked without humor. "We didn't finish our conversation the other day." Jack's fingers tapped the side of the post he'd been fixing. "Sounded finished to me." Reed stepped up to the fence, placing both hands on the top rail. "See, that's where we got off on the wrong foot. You think we're just here to scare you. This isn't about intimidation, Jack. It's about business. Territory. You don't have a say." Jack's eyes didn't move. "They're making me say it again." Reed's nostrils flared. "You don't want trouble, old man." "You're not the first man who said that to me," Jack said. "You won't be the last." That's when Reed's smile vanished. "You think your barn toys are going to save you? A camera? Some floodlights? We've been doing this a long time." Jack gave the faintest nod. "So have I." Mace shifted, uneasy. Trent's hand dropped near his waistband. Helmet guy still hadn't moved. But it wasn't Jack they were watching. It was what they couldn't see. The quiet confidence, the way he didn't posture. That scared them more than a shotgun ever could. Reed seemed to sense the falter in his crew, and that made him reckless. He stepped forward again, lifting one foot to the lowest rung of the fence. Jack's voice hit hard. "Take your foot off my fence." Reed's eyes narrowed. Or what? From the corner of the house came the cocking sound of a bolt-action rifle. Emily stood, calm as you please, rifle braced against her shoulder, the barrel aimed just off to the left, not directly at Reed, but close enough he'd feel it in his teeth. Her eyes were clear, not scared, not angry, just done. Reed hesitated. He hadn't expected her to be part of it. "You came to threaten my wife," Jack said, stepping forward now, just enough to close the space. "I could forgive that. Once. But now you're testing my home. And I don't let anyone test my home." Elnet Guy finally spoke. His voice was raspy, southern drawl, half swallowed by the padding. "Let's go." Reed turned. "What?" I said, "let's go," Helmet said again, louder this time. "This ain't it." Reed looked at his men. They were backing off. Mace already had one foot on his bike. Trent didn't meet his eyes. Reed spat in the dirt. "This ain't over." Jack stepped back. "No, it ain't." They rode off with less sound than before, but more weight. Not defeat, not yet, but the kind of retreat that signaled recalculation, a test that didn't give the answer they wanted. Emily lowered the rifle once they were gone, but she didn't speak. Jack walked over, took her hand gently, and they stood like that for a moment in the rising sun. Inside, the old radio on the kitchen counter buzzed to life. Static, then a familiar voice. "You touched down in 45. Got Remy and Cal with me. Any special instructions?" Jack pressed the talk button. "Come around back. Park near the grain bins. Quiet entrance." "Understood. We bringing the party favors?" Jack glanced at Emily. Her eyes told him yes, but her lips stayed pressed. "Yeah," Jack replied. "Bring everything." An hour later, the beat-up Suburban pulled down the back lane, its muffler barely hanging on and the dust it kicked up trailing like smoke behind a tank. 3 men stepped out. Older, scarred but sharp-eyed and steady. Not young warriors, not brawlers, but trained, precise, military to the bone. Al was first, burly, ex-SEAL like Jack, hands like anvils, neck tattooed with coordinates from a long-ago op in Somalia. He clapped Jack's shoulder. "You look older." "You look fatter," Jack said. Remy was leaner, eyes too quick, always scanning. "Nice place, quiet, almost peaceful." "It was," Jack replied. Shep took a long look at the house. "She still make cornbread?" "She's been baking all week." "Well, hell," Shep grinned. "Then I guess we're staying a while." That night the Dalton house changed. Not in appearance, but in readiness. El rewired the floodlights to trigger on motion from the tree line. Remy set up trip alarms along the fence in 4 quadrants. Shep rigged a CB radio to an old weather antenna Jack hadn't touched since '09. Jack and Emily watched them work. It wasn't militarization. It was preparation. A return to instincts most men spent their lives trying to forget. They ate together around the kitchen table. No one said much. Cal talked a little about Montana winters. Remy asked if the hens still laid blue eggs. Shep buttered 6 biscuits and said nothing the entire meal. But it was understood. They weren't here to help Jack fight. They were here to help him finish something. After dinner, Jack stepped onto the porch and stared down the road again. Emily joined him. "They'll come back," she said. Jack nodded. "I hope they do." The full moon rose fat and amber behind the barn, casting long shadows across the wheat field like bruises. The Dalton farm was still, but it wasn't asleep. Not tonight. Not with the hum of silent men moving through corridors of darkened grain, laying low and watching with eyes trained on more dangerous landscapes in younger years. Inside the house, Emily stood in the kitchen, hands wrapped around a coffee mug she'd already reheated twice. She could hear them outside. Jack, Shep, Remy, Cal. 4 veterans moving with a rhythm not even time could break. They didn't talk much. Didn't need to. Their communication was built on years of understanding. The twitch of a jaw, a hand held too long in the air, a breath caught mid-sentence. Jack had told her once, during his worst night after coming home from the Navy, that in combat you either became brothers with someone or you buried them. That was it. Now those same brothers were patrolling the edges of her home. She took a deep breath and glanced at the clock. Almost midnight. The power flickered once. Just a hiccup. She reached for the flashlight under the sink out of habit. Jack had made sure they were in every room. Then she heard it. The low rumble. It wasn't tires on gravel this time. It was heavier, louder. A convoy, not a visit. She walked to the front window and lifted the curtain. 3 bikes. 1 truck. The pickup was an old Chevy with aftermarket lights on the roof and a brush guard across the front grille. The kind of vehicle not meant for hauling lumber, but for intimidation. Behind the wheel, barely lit by the moonlight, was a man she didn't recognize. Big, even sitting down. And angry. The bikes peeled into the driveway, fanning out as the truck rolled up behind them. The gravel crunched beneath heavy tires. 1 headlight flickered like a dying eye. Emily stepped out onto the porch. Jack was already standing near the barn, Shep flanking him. Cow was behind the grain bins. Remy crouched near the old irrigation ditch, invisible unless you knew where to look. Every man had a job. Every man knew what line not to cross. Until the enemy did. Reed got off his bike first, slower this time, like a man trying to appear casual while barely containing the violence simmering just beneath his skin. His face was different now. Less smug, more feral. The kind of look a cornered dog gives before it bites. "You brought backup," Jack said, his voice carrying clearly in the night air. Reed turned to the truck. The driver door open, and out stepped a mountain. 6'4", maybe more, with arms like telephone poles and a face that looked like it had forgotten how to smile years ago. "This is Bear," Reed said. "He don't talk much, but he listens real well." Jack nodded once. "You here to make introductions or to make mistakes?" Bear stepped forward, slow, deliberate, until he was within 10 feet of Jack. He didn't speak, just stared. Reed gestured broadly. "We're here to settle things. Fairly. No guns. No calls to the sheriff. You let us move some of our product through this town. Just a few crates now and then. Nobody gets hurt." Jack didn't move. "No," he said. Reed's smile snapped. "You're not thinking clearly. You're a retired guy. You've got a nice farm, a beautiful wife. Why risk all that?" "Feeling's exactly why I'm not saying yes," Jack replied. "You brought 5 men to threaten 1 woman. You think that's strength. I see weakness." The silence that followed was razor-thin. Then Bear took a single step forward. Jack didn't move, but from the shadows, Shep's voice rang out, "I wouldn't take another step if I were you." Bear stopped. A red laser dot bloomed on his chest. "Sniper?" Reed asked, his voice cracking just slightly. "Nah," came Cal's voice from the left. "Just a guy with a good scope and no patience." Reed looked around. His confidence was draining like air from a slashed tire. "Is this what it is now?" Reed hissed. "You hiding behind a bunch of war fossils?" Jack stepped forward finally, close enough now to let the moonlight show the small scar under his eye, the one from the knife fight in Kandahar that left the other man in a bag. "No," Jack said. "They're not hiding behind me. I asked them to come. Because this land, this house, this woman, they're worth fighting for." Reed spat on the dirt. "Last chance, Dalton." "No," Jack said again. "It's your last chance. You ride out now and you'll still be able to eat solid food next week." Bear's hand dropped toward his belt. Remy's voice sliced through the night. "Don't." Bear paused, then froze, because somewhere in the shadows the click of a safety being released echoed louder than thunder. Reed's men shifted, looking around. They hadn't expected this. They thought they were going to ride in and deliver threats like mail. Instead, they'd rolled into something older than their club. Discipline, brotherhood, firepower. Reed looked at Jack again. "I'll burn this place down." Jack stared back. "I'll be standing in the ashes." Hate it, and then it happened. Reed lunged. Not for Jack, but for Emily. He moved faster than anyone expected, using the moment of confusion like a smokescreen. But she didn't flinch. Her hand moved like muscle memory, like she'd been waiting for it. The shotgun from under the porch beam swung up, one-handed. Emily pulled the trigger. The shot rang out across the field like a whip crack. Buckshot tore into the dirt at Reed's feet, spraying gravel and flame. He stumbled, fell backward, landing hard with a grunt. Bear moved instinctively, but so did Shep. 2 steps, a tackle, and the mountain met the earth like a downed tree. Cal appeared from the shadows and pinned Bear's arms, while Shep zip-tied his wrists. The rest of the bikers froze. Remy stepped out, rifle held casual but clear. Jack knelt beside Reed. "You're not dead? That means she showed mercy. It's more than I would have done." Reed was wheezing, dirt in his mouth, eyes wide with something that had been missing before. "See ya." Jack stood. "Tell the rest of your crew this isn't territory. This is home, and we don't share it." Cal shoved Bear toward the truck. Mace and the others started backing away. Nobody wanted to find out what would happen if they stayed. Jack watched them leave, not chasing, not shouting, just watching. Emily stood on the porch, the shotgun still in her hands. Jack looked at her and smiled. "Remind me to never argue with you." She raised an eyebrow. "I did warn them." He nodded. And behind them the house stood quiet, strong, but no longer unguarded. Morning broke with the smell of gunpowder still faint in the air. It clung to the porch railings, lingered in the wheat fields, and hung in the folds of Emily's shirt as she stood barefoot in the doorway, cradling a cup of hot coffee. Her fingers were steady, her eyes alert. She didn't flinch at the creak of the screen door opening behind her. Jack stepped out, rubbing his shoulder with one hand, the stiffness of the previous night's fight settling deep into his joints. "Anything?" he asked, his voice low, rough from a night spent mostly on his feet. "No movement. Not yet," Emily said, handing him the second mug she'd prepared. "The fields are clear, gates undisturbed." He nodded and took the mug, sipping carefully. They stood together in silence, 2 figures bound by dirt, sweat, and a promise that nothing, no one, would drive them from their home. Jack's mind was already turning. Reed hadn't come back yet, but men like him didn't just slink off into the dark and stay gone. They regrouped, reassessed, struck again, harder, more desperate, and usually more stupid. "What do you think?" Emily asked, as if she could read the lines forming behind his eyes. "I think they're embarrassed. That's worse than angry. Anger burns fast. Shame simmers. Reed's not the kind to let humiliation sit too long." Emily set her mug down on the porch rail. "Then we stay ready." Jack looked over at her. She hadn't slept. Neither had he. But her shoulders were square, her chin lifted, eyes sharper than any blade. "I don't deserve you," he said. "You married me anyway," she replied, and for the first time in days they both laughed. From the edge of the barn Shep emerged, yawning like a man who'd slept on concrete, which in effect he had. He adjusted the strap on his shoulder holster and stretched his back. "CB picked up some chatter last night," he said as he walked toward them. "Not local, but close. I think Reed reached out to someone out of state. Outlaws or another chapter, maybe. Wasn't specific." Jack's jaw clenched. "Back up?" "Sounds like it. Maybe not today, but soon." Emily crossed her arms. You still think we're dealing with businessmen? No, Shep said. Now we're dealing with bruised egos and men who think showing up in numbers equals power. Jack turned toward the barn. Get Remy and Cal. Let's run the drill again. By mid-morning, the Dalton farm was a hive of silent preparation. No one barked orders. No one shouted. It was the kind of calm that only comes from people who've seen what real chaos looks like. Cal fortified the fence line with tripwires linked to flares. Nothing lethal, just enough to paint targets if someone came through the dark. Remy tested the motion sensors and replaced the old ones with new gear he'd pulled from his battered duffel. Inside the house, Emily reloaded shells with practiced hands. The reloading bench Jack had built her years ago sat by the back window. Back then it was just a hobby. Now it was a necessity. They moved like a team that had never stopped operating. Like no time had passed since their worst years. Like home was just another battlefield and they were damned if they'd lose it. By noon the wind shifted. Jack smelled it before he saw it. Diesel. Unfiltered, dirty. He grabbed the binoculars and climbed the windmill platform at the edge of the south pasture. From there he saw them. 3 more bikes, 1 van, and a black SUV with dark-tinted windows crawling down the county road. No markings, no plates, just steel and silence. He keyed the radio. Incoming, South Road. More than yesterday, they're armed. Cal's voice came back. Copy. Positions? Standard hold. Don't fire unless fired upon. Jack stayed up there longer than he needed to, watching the dust cloud, counting the shapes, feeling the pressure build in his ribs like a coiled spring. The convoy didn't take the driveway this time. They pulled into the access road that ran parallel to the tree line. It put them out of sight from the house, but within distance of the back barn and the small corral. A message. A new game. Emily watched from the upstairs bedroom, eyes locked on the tree line through the scope of her rifle. They're not here to negotiate, she said into the walkie. I know, Jack replied. Let's give them the chance anyway, just once. 10 minutes later, Jack walked out into the open. No weapon, no just a man in a weathered flannel shirt and boots worn down from 20 seasons of farm work. He stopped 20 feet from the edge of the trees and waited. Reed stepped out first. But he didn't look like a leader anymore. He looked like someone trying to hold on to power by pretending he hadn't already lost it. Behind him came 2 more bikers. New ones. Lean, wired like sprung traps. One carried a sawed-off shotgun with the easy comfort of experience. The other had an old M4 slung low and lazy over his shoulder. The SUV door opened, and a man in a black windbreaker stepped out. Clean-shaven, sharp-eyed. Not a biker. Ex-military. Jack knew it the moment their eyes met. You, Jack Dalton? The new man asked. I am. I'm Boyd. I'm not here for a turf war. I'm here because your friend over there, he gestured toward Reed with a disgusted flick of his chin, said your place would be easy. Jack raised an eyebrow. Is it? Boyd cracked a smile. I don't think so. Reed stepped forward, angry now. You said you'd help us take the farm. Run some supply through here. Just said I'd check it out. That's all, Boyd said. Jack looked at Boyd, then nodded slightly. Then check it out. Boyd studied the field, the fencing, the barn. His eyes caught the camera by the grain silo, the new tripwire glinting just barely in the sun, the small glint of a scope reflecting from the house window. He whistled low. You set a perimeter. Jack said nothing. You've got shooters, Boyd continued. Well-disciplined ones. This ain't some stubborn farmer standing his ground. This is coordinated. Jack's silence was the only answer. Boyd turned to Reed. You didn't say he was military. Reed's face tightened. He's just a guy who... He's a SEAL, Boyd cut in, or was. And those guys don't forget how to be dangerous. Ever. Reed tried to hide the shake in his voice. He's bluffing. Boyd laughed once, short, sharp. "No, you are, and I'm not getting dragged into a vendetta because you got humiliated in front of your crew." Boyd turned back to Jack. "No more problems from me. I'm gone." Jack nodded once. That would be best. Boyd got in the SUV. It turned around, slow, deliberate, and rolled back toward the highway. Reed looked like he was about to speak, but one of the new bikers grabbed his shoulder and jerked his head toward the bikes. Reed hesitated, then turned, got on, and left. No one looked back. When the dust cleared and the road was quiet again, Jack exhaled through his teeth, then turned and walked back to the house. Not running, unshaken, just steady. The sun dipped low behind the distant line of trees, casting long golden fingers over the wheat, the barn, and the scarred gravel driveway that now sat silent. The only sounds were the rustling of wind through the tall grass and the occasional cluck from the henhouse. For the first time in days, the Dalton farm felt still. Not tense, not guarded, just still. Jack sat on the porch steps, arms resting on his knees, a cold lemonade sweating on the wood beside him. His shirt clung to him from the late afternoon labor. No drills today, no watch rotations, just real work. He'd rebuilt the chicken coop door, replaced the busted fence post near the orchard, and even mended the seat on the old tractor Emily always said was too loud to sneak up on her. And now, for the first time in a long while, he just sat. Emily stepped out of the house barefoot, 2 mason jars in her hand, and her hair pulled up in that lopsided knot she only wore when she was at peace. She handed him a jar and sat beside him, tucking her feet under her. He looked at her for a long moment before speaking. "It's Hova," he said. She didn't ask him if he was sure. She just nodded and leaned her head against his shoulder. They both knew. The town had caught wind of what happened, not the specifics, but enough. Folks who had waved from a distance before now dropped by with baskets of cornbread, jars of pickled beans, and coolers of deer meat. Not because Jack and Emily needed anything, just because they wanted to be part of the fence. Reinforcements in their own way, the kind that didn't carry guns but showed up just the same. Sheriff Colburn came by 2 mornings ago, his cruiser door hanging open while he stood beside the porch, thumbs hooked in his belt. "Heard some noise out your way," he'd said. "Not much on paper, no complaints filed, but word gets around." Jack had stood quietly beside him, arms crossed. "I looked into Reed Marlowe," the sheriff continued. "Turns out he's got warrants in 3 counties. That van of his was spotted crossing state lines yesterday morning. I reckon he won't be coming back." Objection. Jack had nodded once. "Appreciate the check-in." Colburn squinted toward the barn. "You boys still here?" "They're leaving today." "Good men," the sheriff had said, and then climbed back into his cruiser and disappeared down the road. Now Shep, Cal, and Remy were packing up their gear. They didn't talk about where they were headed. They never did. That wasn't the point. The point was that they'd come when called, and they'd leave when it was safe again. Remy was the last to zip his bag, standing by the grain bins one final time, staring out at the hills like he was trying to memorize the light. "She's strong," he said to Jack. "Your wife, not just in the way she held that shotgun. She never looked away." Jack nodded. "She never does." Shep clapped him on the back as he passed by. "You ever need us again?" "I'll know where to find you," Jack said. Cal tossed his duffel into the back of the truck. "Try not to pick fights with clubs anymore." "I didn't pick this one," Jack replied, "but I finished it." Cal grinned. "That's why we showed up." They climbed into the old Suburban, the suspension creaking like it always had, and Jack watched them roll down the back road until the dust swallowed them. By the time he returned to the porch, Emily had already set out a small dinner. Fried chicken, roasted squash from the garden, and fresh biscuits wrapped in a clean towel. They didn't say grace out loud, but the way they paused before eating said enough. After the plates were cleared, Emily lit the oil lamp and set it beside the porch swing. The electricity was working fine, but some nights called for softer light. She curled up beside Jack, the two of them watching the horizon shift from gold to blue to deep violet. "You think it'll go back to how it was?" she asked. "No," Jack said, "but maybe it'll become something better." Emily turned her head. "Better?" Jack thought for a moment. "We were quiet before, kept to ourselves. But now, people know. The town, our neighbors. They saw what we stood for. You think that's a good thing?" "I do," he said. "I think for too long we tried to be invisible. It doesn't work anymore. The world's louder now. You don't always get to stay out of it, but you can show it who you are." Emily nodded slowly. "I like who we are." "So do I," he said. She leaned her head against his chest and closed her eyes. "You scared me, you know. That day by the fence, when you stepped forward." "I know. I kept thinking, what if he doesn't come back from this one?" Jack wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "That's always the risk. But I wasn't going to let them touch you. Not ever." "I know," she whispered. "I knew the moment you walked out of that barn." They rocked in silence for a while, the swing creaking softly beneath them. The chickens had quieted, the fields glowed under the moonlight. The Dalton farm, this place of sweat and soil and stories, had survived another storm. In the distance, a coyote howled, not close, not dangerous, just alive. Jack stood finally, stretching his back, and helped Emily to her feet. "Come on," he said. "Let's get inside. Tomorrow's another day." She took his hand and followed. Inside, the house smelled like lavender and fresh wood polish, clean, lived in, safe. Jack paused before bed, staring out the window one last time. The wheat swayed gently under the moon, a sea of silver gold. And in that moment, he didn't see a battlefield. He saw a sanctuary, a place worth protecting, and a woman who had always been the strongest line of defense he'd ever known. When he slid into bed beside her, she reached for him without opening her eyes, fingers lacing into his. "Sleep," she murmured. "We're okay now." And they were. They truly were.